Mm, mm. Hello, friends. Mm, Okay. Hello, friends. Uh, Strangers, enemies, kind mothers. I'd like to read from an essay by Errikos. I think his name is Greek, so he may be Greek, but he lives in Romania, and he he does several things. He's been doing several things. He's been translating uh, Tibetan works into English, usually, and also teaching Tibetan, the language. Hmm. I'd like to learn from him. Uh, so, so yeah, he's been around studying Tibetan Buddhism. He likes to call it Vajrayana. Tibetan Vajrayana. Hmm. So there's three major divisions of Buddhism. There's Theravada, that could be considered a kind of Hinayana, but they don't. The Theravadists don't like that word. It wouldn't either, because Hina means lesser. And then there's Mahayana. Maha means greater, so the Mahayanists were the ones that came up with the word Hinayana. So the Buddhists that didn't get with the Mahayana program, the Mahayanists would say, "Oh, they're just Hinayanas." Hinayana, Hinayanists. The ending of both is similar. Ayana, that means vehicle. Mhm. So there's Hinayana, Mahayana. Yeah. Out of Mahayana came an even more, you could say, more advanced, mm, mm, and more personal, more esoteric form of Buddhism, called Vajrayana. Vajra means diamond mind, indestructible mind. Hmm. Could also mean the ultimate reality, the ultimate, the absolute, the true self, maybe you could say. Uh, Connecting with your soul, your higher self, those kind of things. Non duality. Hmm. But also Vajrayana is, they think of themselves as Mahayanists, but on a more more demanding path, you could say, because they want to bring about their enlightenment. They want to become a Buddha in this life. So for now, you could say that there's Theravada, which is a kind of Hinayana. It's the remaining Hinayana. Maybe there were many different schools of Hinayana, and they went away, and there's one left called Theravada. Well, it's actually pretty large and pretty diverse because there's Theravada in Sri Lanka, and there's Theravada in Myanmar or Burma, and there's Theravada in Thailand and in Laos, maybe even in Vietnam, but mostly Vietnam is now Mahayana, I would say, by the looks of Thich Nhat Hanh. Mm. Well, he actually mm, studies Theravada. He studied Theravada literature in Pali. So another way of addressing the different types of Buddhism is that Theravada Buddhism follows certain scriptures that were preserved in a language that came to be known as Pali, 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 Pali. And it's kind of a vernacular form of Sanskrit. And the people that spoke and studied and memorized things in Sanskrit were the elites, like the Brahmin priests, whereas most other people were speaking something similar to Pali. I think they call it Prakrit. Prakrit, those kinds of languages versus Sanskrit. So you could think of Prakrit as being like Italian, Spanish, and French, based on Latin, the Romance languages. And then you could think of Latin as being the elite language, the ancient language from which those other languages come from. In the same way, you could say that Sanskrit is that ancient language from which all those other languages came from, like Hindi hmm, and hmm, other languages from India, including Pali. But Pali is still considered kind of ancient. Uh, it's in the same situation as Sanskrit in that probably won't find people speaking it anymore, like communities of speaking it, and it's not going to be evolving. So it's kind of they don't like to. It's not nice to call it called Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit and Pali as dead languages. So you prefer to call them ancient languages, right? Or classical languages. But let's see. Wow. So You could divide Buddhism into two kinds of Buddhisms that follow two different languages. One follows the Pali text, text text, and the other one follows the Sanskrit text. And it seems like they ended up becoming divergent in that the Pali texts they they did something like what Christianity did to the Bible. They selected uh, the best ones to be the canonical texts, and so they omitted those that they didn't think was right. And so I think that the folks that decided that omitted the ones that ended up going to the Sanskrit folks, the Buddhists, writing everything down in Sanskrit. Now, if the Buddha originally taught in a language similar to what we now know as Pali, uh, then to get to the Sanskrit, the, the Sanskrit Buddhists may have had to have taken what was being preserved in Pali and translating it all over into Sanskrit. Now, I'm not sure if that's what they did, but I'd have to investigate. Or is it that there were some literature that was purely Sanskrit and didn't go through Pali to get to Sanskrit? I didn't look at the Pali and translate it into Sanskrit. Maybe there was another language between the Buddha and Sanskrit that they went through. It was different from Pali. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting that the Sanskrit literature got written down, and yeah, Sanskrit's also used for a lot of literature for the Hindus, like the Bhagavad Gita. And you can learn Sanskrit with a script called Devanagari, and then that's based off of Brahmi script or something like that. Hmm. So Brahmani script, and and I think so. That's the root of many uh, writing scripts, and I think either Brahmani was used or Devanagari was used as a model to create the Tibetan script. Hmm. Or maybe there was something else, but they're all very pretty similar in structure, I'd say. Hmm. Yeah, so, but the Tibetans did an amazing thing, and that is to come up with their own script in order to translate the Buddhist literature from Sanskrit to Tibetan. The Chinese were doing the same thing. They were translating Sanskrit into Chinese. And sometimes there was some things that were already in Chinese, and the Tibetans may have translated it into Tibetan from the Chinese, but I'd say most of it was from the Sanskrit to Tibetan. And then there were some works in that came from Sanskrit that ended up being preserved in the Tibetan, and the Sanskrit disappeared, and so they no longer had the Sanskrit. But these scholars or translators were able to come up with a Sanskrit that seems pretty reasonable by translating the Tibetan back to Sanskrit, and they would fondly say that it looks pretty accurate. It looks like it would have been something like that, the original Sanskrit version. By going from Tibetan to Sanskrit, you'd get the Sanskrit. It was pretty decent in going back and forth between the languages. They say to a high degree. Anyway, that's a small percentage, I would say, of the whole literature. Most of it was from Sanskrit to Tibetan, for the Tibetan Buddhism, the Tibetan Vajrayana. So there's so yeah, all the literature that is Mahayana had to have gone through Sanskrit. So in that sense, that includes Vajrayana. It came from Sanskrit versions from India to Tibet. Mm. And some Sanskrit versions went to China, and from China to Korea, and then to Japan. But I think Tibet was a little slow in getting with the program, because China was already very very enthusiastic, had much enthusiasm in getting Buddhism into their country, and Tibet was a little bit slower because it needed a powerful king, an emperor, to take over all the Tibetan region, and then decide to say, okay, now that we've got this big empire, we need to develop our own writing system. So they went to India and came up with their Tibetan writing system by using the same principles that are used in Sanskrit. Sort of like a pretty decent phonetic writing system, pretty good. All the sounds are pretty well represented, and so hmm, so there you have it. So you could say that Buddhism is you could divide it into two parts: the Pali, um, the Pali uh, Buddhism, based on their Pali literature of Buddhism, um, and the Sanskrit Buddhism, and that corresponds to Mahayana and Vajrayana. The Pali corresponds to Theravada. And another way of thinking about it is Well, hmm, yeah, in Theravada, you have three baskets of literature. They call them baskets because you put all their literature into three different baskets. Well, maybe one of them would surpass the other two. It's pretty big. That one would be called the sutras or suttas, which supposed to be the words of the Buddha or his teachings set in occasions like mm, that one day the Buddha went to see this person or something like that. So in different stories, but they try to organize it different ways. There's a little bit of overlapping, different ways of they seem to have a team of people memorizing the literature. So not they were organized into teams, I would say. So maybe a certain team would work on certain sutras, certain texts, and and organize them in a certain way, making them easy to memorize. But the three baskets I'm thinking about are the sutras. In Pali, it's suttas, and in Sanskrit, it's sutras. It's got an R in there. hmm And that's supposed to mean basically the words of the Buddha, not in not condensed or abridged, but in story form. so it's so it's pretty voluminous, I would say. Then another basket would end up being called the rules. The rules for the society of monks living in monasteries or hmm, yeah, gatherings or gangs of Buddhists. Mhm. Yeah, so you have to have rules for them how to function. Interesting. Mhm. So you mhm. supposedly the monks would end up having to memorize those rules, but the rules got pretty big. Like they ended up being over 250 rules, and and maybe 20 or 30 or 40 more for women. For the nuns, they added a few more rules for the nuns to protect them. You could say. Hmm. So that that basket is called Vinaya. So Sutta, Vinaya, and then there's the third one is Abhidhamma. Abhidhamma. Oh, that's an interesting basket. I'd say it's not as huge as the suttas. Maybe it's only 5% as big, and not too many people study it. Huh. But it's like all the teachings of the Buddha when you extract the story behind them, like get rid of the names and just mm, get down to the essence of it. So maybe it's kind of abstract and very technical and almost scientific. You could say it's the science of the mind. It's just lays it out in different ways, and maybe I imagine it's like a treatise in this comparable to something maybe the Greek Aristotle might have done in categorizing things. Yeah, setting it, putting everything logically, I say, and systematically, and getting to the essence of, of what's going on. Hmm. Yeah, Abhidhamma. That's something I need to study more. There's a Chinese school. There's like a podcast I heard, and it's a Chinese monk or something. He was teaching that the Abhidhamma should be ignored. It really wasn't the Buddha's teaching. It's some people later on, yes, trying to bring it all together into one, but he considers it mm, heretical. Anyway, mm, mm, mm. It's interesting that that there's the Theravada Abhidhamma, and then there's the Mahayana Abhidhamma. They're a little bit different. Mm. Yeah, and if you look at the sutras in Tibetan, they're quite different from the sutras of the Theravada, of the Theravada schools. You can find the sutras of the Theravadas, and maybe the Abhidhamma too, and the Vinaya. Vinaya? Is that what it's called? Or is it Niyama? Oh, 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 my memory is correct. Maybe we should check. Let's see. Share. Hmm. Screen. You can use screen. And then you can go to, hmm, you can go here. Hmm. So, hmm, three baskets of Buddhism. Hmm. The three baskets of Buddhism, also known as the Tripitaka or Tipitaka. I think hmm, the Tripitaka, that's the Sanskrit way of saying it. The Tipitaka would be the Pali way. The Pali tends to um, remove the R's. So it simplifies the Sanskrit. That's what happens with vernacular languages compared to as they become simplifier or slurring, maybe. Hmm. I'd say. So the primary collection of Buddhist texts. So yeah, the Vinaya, monastic rules, the Sutta, discourses of the Buddha, and the Abhidhamma, philosophical analysis of the teachings. Together they form the doctrinal foundations of the Theravada and guide practitioner study and practice. Mhm. Hmm. Okay, so now I'm going to go study. Hmm. Hmm. And I'm going to read what I wanted to read. It's pretty long, so I don't think I'll finish it. But here I go. So I'm gonna read all this. It's very long, and I think it's written by Eric Errikos. What's his last name? Oh, it's hard for me to remember his last name. Well, I think he wrote it. Let's see, here it is. Oh, shoot. Let's see if I can find him. There he goes. Phew, look how he's on Facebook. And oops, what happened? So that's his name, Errikos Eleftherios Tsiknopoulos. And that's how you say it or write it in Greek. He's a translator, author, researcher, language tutor, Buddhist studies, and Tibetan literature specialist. He lives in Romania. And what's he look like? Maybe he doesn't want to be seen. Mhm. Probably has a picture of himself somewhere. Mhm. Maybe, maybe that's what he looks like. If you want to find him in the crowd. Mhm. That was in 2014. As in Hong Kong. Mm, let's see if I can. Let's see if I can. Mm, mhm. Let's see. Well, well, we could go like this and find other photos. Maybe that's what he looks like. Yeah, that's what it looks like. Mm, maybe that's fairly recent. Mm, maybe that's what he looks like. He likes one side. I think that's what he looks like. And there's one. So now we know what he looks like. And now we know his last name or middle name or whatever. Let's see if I can copy his name. Hmm. Shoot, I can't do it. Hmm. Let's see if anybody goes. Let's see. Hmm. Master the Tibetan language. Elite online instructions. I think I have to. Oh, there you go. Let's see. Let's see if I can get this. Errikos. Yeah. Let's see. So, hmm, hmm. And Vajrayana. Shit. Okay. Hmm. So let's read this article by Errikos Eleftherios Signopoulos, shared on Facebook in around April 2025. Hmm. I guess I could find it. Could find the original place where he. Hmm. He posted this maybe a day ago or less. So it has to have been April something, April 29. Yeah, 20 hours ago. That would have been April 29. So, Errikos writes, reimagining Western Vajrayana. Vajra, Vajrayana. Vajrayana. Mhm. It sometimes has a with a, you can write it without that, and people will understand what you're talking about. Write it without that long a. That technically and scholastically, you're going to put it on there. It's a long a. Vajrayana. Okay, so reimagining Western Vajrayana. What does he mean? Is he going to reimagine it? Maybe he's trying to modernize it. Maybe it's undergoing growing pains. And it needs to change. That's why I put it up here on Tibetan. You should put this on Tibetan Vajrayana being absorbed and transformed in the West. Article or essay. Mm, Essay by Errikos Eleftherios. Eleftherios Tsiknopoulos. Phew. Mhm. So what does he say? Reimagining Western Vajrayana. So he's assuming that uh, this form of Buddhism, Vajrayana, is the one that comes from Tibetan Buddhism, is going to be transformed into Western Vajrayana. The struggle, this is a subtitle, the struggle to preserve authenticity in a changing world. In the over 2 decades that I've been closely involved with Tibetan Vajrayana Buddhism, that would be since 2003. That's Errikos speaking or writing. He's saying that he says, I've had the honor and privilege of witnessing the growth of this profound tradition in the West. Tibetan Buddhism is a vast, nuanced, powerful, and transformative spiritual system, renowned globally for its philosophical depth, its potential for holistic personal development, and its inclusive approach. Inclusive approach to the practice of the Dharma. When you find you find the Dharma with a capital D, That means you're talking about the Buddhist, hmm, the Buddhist doctrine, teachings, and practices. Hmm, the religion of Buddhism could be called the Dharma. But the Buddha wanted it to be a practice. So that's why he says the practice of the Dharma. It has an inclusive approach. That means anyone can practice it. Over time, not only practice it, but become a Buddha through its practice. So anyone can become a Buddha. That's the highest level of attainment. In Buddhism, and a Buddha then becomes omniscient. Wow, godlike, maybe even superior to God. Over time, it has captured the hearts and minds of countless individuals seeking to better understand the nature of the mind, the universe, and the path to liberation or enlightenment. Mm. So, what he's saying there, the way he expresses himself is an example, hmm, or, or has the the fundamentals of uh, of Mahayana Buddhism, because maybe you might not find a writer, an author, or such language, such vocabulary being used by a Hinayana Buddhist, a Theravada Buddhist. Eh, because why would I say that? Hmm. Well, or what clues do I have? What evidence do I have for saying that? Mhm, 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 mhm. Well, maybe he doesn't explicitly say that there. Mhm. Maybe I went overboard. Maybe potential for holistic personal development. Well, the word inclusive approach to the practice of the Dharma is suggesting that the Mahayana, and in particular the Vajrayana, is supposed to be inclusive in that the ultimate goal should be available to everyone. And because that's what everyone wants, is to become a Buddha, In the end. Mhm. Mm. History. Ah. Mm. Over time, it has captured the hearts and minds of countless individuals seeking to better understand the nature of the mind, the universe, and the path to liberation or enlightenment. Now, is the path to liberation, in other words, the word liberation by itself versus enlightenment? There's a difference between liberation and enlightenment. Is he treating them as synonyms, or are they, is one mm, different from the other? Well, no. Are they different from each other? You can't have one be different from the other and the other one not be different from the other. Mhm. And so if one of them is different, they're both going to be different from each other by the same amount. If one is 10% different from the other one, then that other one is also 10% different from the other one. Mm. That I would say that liberation is a little bit different from enlightenment. Hmm. I would say that liberation would be a wish to end one's own suffering, while enlightenment might mean is in Mahayana Buddhism, there is the idea of the bodhisattva. The bodhisattva decides to not to get away from samsara, or in other words, cyclic transmigration, cyclic rebirth, dying and being reborn since the beginning of time. And then one decides, I've had enough. I want liberation from going to be reborn. Mm. Mm. I suppose you could say that enlightenment does include that liberation, but there's a technical difference. Mhm. In enlightenment, mm, you want to go through certain stages to get to enlightenment. But before you get to the complete enlightenment, you want to be able to help others move in that direction so that they too may become liberated. So, in this process of helping others, that is the key difference between Mahayana and Theravada. The Theravada practitioner might only want their own personal liberation. But the Mahayanist would want their mm, would want their liberation and others too. And it seems to get them, benefit them by thinking about others, then they relax and don't worry about themselves so much, so they do better. Because when you're just thinking about yourself, you're pretty uptight. Mm, mhm. Yeah, let's go on. It'll it'll come together, I think, as we move along. I think. What's he trying to do? Well, I guess he's kind of going over his life and kind of giving an overview of what Tibetan Buddhism is, mm, what it's done so far over the past several decades since he started. So he's been into it very deeply since 2003. So in 2003, he started learning Tibetan, I suppose. Hmm. And he learned it and he started uh, getting gigs in translating, I suppose. Hmm. Well, who knows how long it took him to learn Tibetan? Maybe it took him 3, 4, 5 years, and then he started translating. So maybe his translating may have started in 2008, 2009, 2010 or something. Right. Mhm. So let's look here to the contemporary evolution of an ancient tradition, navigating modern challenges in Vajrayana. Sorry. As Tibetan Vajrayana made its way to the west and elsewhere outside the Himalayan region, it was inevitably influenced by the differing cultural context into which it was introduced. And this encounter brought about many positive developments, foremost among them a greater appreciation for Tibetan philosophy and religious practice. There have also been challenges, but began as isolated misunderstandings or misrepresentations in the 2000s, has slowly evolved into a more complex dynamic. In some cases, this is manifested as a disconnect between the deeper, more authentic aspects of the tradition and the more surface level or commercialized interpretations that have gained visibility. Mhm. Though it is important to acknowledge these shifts, it is equally crucial to recognize the ongoing efforts within the relevant communities to preserve the integrity of the tradition. There are many dedicated teachers, scholars, and practitioners who continue to uphold the core values of wisdom, compassion, and authentic spiritual inquiry. Yet, as we navigate this changing landscape, question remains, how can we safeguard the essence of Vajrayana in a world that often seeks quick fixes and immediate gratification. Hmm. The empty throne, the collapse of Western Vajrayana greats. Oh, in recent years, it has been commonly observed that many of the so-called greats of Western Vajrayana now stand revealed in an increasingly unflattering light, not through malicious exposure, but through their own karmic actions, which have become impossible to reconcile with their carefully constructed public personas. The recent emergence of websites and public forums criticizing objectively toxic figures like Adele Tomlin represents not an anomaly, but an inevitable consequence. The breaking point of a system long festering with dysfunction. These public critiques, however imperfect their execution, signal something profoundly important: the collective recognition that certain patterns of harmful behavior can no longer be dismissed as isolated incidents of defensible eccentricities. These public pushbacks, which have been brewing since 2017, in particular, represent the culmination of countless private conversations, conversations, whispered warnings, and shared experiences over the last decade between thousands of people that, when finally connected and seen as interdependently related, reveal not random abuses but an internally coherent system of exploitation or misrepresentation of Buddhism with identifiable mechanisms and starkly predictable outcomes. Oh, hmm. Let's see what's the fuss with Adele Tomlin. Adele Tomlin is a British independent scholar, translator, and practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism. She is the founder of Dakini Translations, a platform dedicated to translating and sharing Tibetan Buddhist texts. Adele has a background in law, philosophy, and Tibetology, having studied at institutions like King's College London and the University of Hamburg. Her work includes translating significant texts such as Taranata's commentary on the Heart Sutra, exploring topics like Buddhist philosophy, feminist perspective, and Vajrayana practices. Well, that's impressive. Nothing wrong with all that. It's awesome, right? She has also shared her insights through interviews and talks discussing her journey into Buddhism. Her translation work and her research on female mystics in Tibetan Buddhism. If you in here, mm, mm, tell me, tell me more. Mm-hmm, mm, 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 mm. Wow. Mm, mm, mm. Hmm. Let's see. Okay. Normally in India, Nepal, highest yoga tantra initiations were given one to one between a qualified teacher and student, or in very small groups, not to masses of people, most of whom are unqualified. The classic example is that of the Indian Mahasiddha Tilopa, who refused to give any Vajrayana teachings to the famed Nalanda scholar Naropa until he had served him like a slave for 3 years. And when and when he ordered him to jump off a roof, which he immediately did. These days, a sign of the degenerate times, anyone can sign up for Vajrayana empowerments online with teachers who do not know and have never met the recipients, and vice versa. Often these empowerments are done for money, suggested donations. Since May 1954, the 14th Dalai Lama has conducted 34 Kala Chakra initiations outside of Tibet. Hmm. The most recent initiation, which had 200,000 people in attendance, was carried out in January 2017 in Bodh Gaya, India. However, the first Kala Chakra initiation that was given to large, diverse public audiences outside of Tibet was conducted not by the 14th Dalai Lama, but by the ninth Panchen Lama at the turn of the 20th century. Nine such Kalachakra initiations were given by the ninth Panchen Lama from 1928 to 1936. Tens of thousands of attendees from Inner Mongolia, Republic of China, and parts of Ando, such as Mongol lords and princes, Chinese politicians and warlords, foreign dignitaries, distinguished Buddhists from various transnational traditional celebrities, socialites, university students, as well as thousands of interested individuals all flocked to the rituals. Mm. Wow, the ninth Panchalama, who had to flee into exile from the 13th Dalai Lama's excessive demands and seek help from the Chinese communists. Wow. The 13th Dalai Lama, whose harsh and unfair rule caused the ninth Panchen Lama to flee Tibet. It was also interested. I was also interested to discover that the ninth Panchen Lama had actually had a dispute with the 13th Dalai Lama and went into exile, traveling to in Inner Mongolia and the Republic of China. Mm. the, he left Tibet. The Panchen Lama left Tibet and began more than a decade of exile travel in Inner Mongolia and the Republic of China. Beijing, 1925, he gave a speech read by Lawson Yeltsin at the National Reconstruction Conference. The speech denounced internal disputes within the ROC government over power struggles and suggested the collaboration of five nationalities. This was the first time that the Panchalama used the ROC's rhetoric of the five races under one union in public. In the following months of the same year, the Panchalama gave a series of green and white Tara and Amaterasu initiations at Mount Wu Tai, as well as in Beijing, Hangzhou, and Shanghai. Mm. Wow, spread the Dharma outside of Tibet. He spread it into China. In fact, by the end of 1929, the ninth Panchalama set up several offices in China in support of the Chinese government. Wow, in pursuit of the liberation of the Tibetan people. Mm. Hmm. I'm trying to find the link to should be around. Should be hiding it. That should be a recent post. He's been posting a lot. Hmm. this is a good article. Wow, this is mm, wow, this is what I copied, isn't it? Wow, that happened. Shit, damn. Case study one. That's it. Yeah. What's going on? Hmm. Wow. I hmm. Obviously I've only read 10%. It's a long article, but requires careful study. Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. I thought that Adele Tomlin hmm, might have something of a sexual nature, like misconduct. Mm, that kind of rumor or controversy, or maybe that or maybe she did, maybe or at least I get that she might be criticizing some lamas, maybe, and the Tibetan Buddhist community doesn't like that, so they're being critical of her. Maybe and I guess Errikos is maybe defending or showing that uh, hmm, she's doing some not very nice things, but it doesn't seem to be of a sexual nature, although she might be using her sexuality to get her way. Well, not to the point of giving her body to some important person. I don't know, but maybe. Uh, hmm, hmm, what? I don't know. I'll have to read this carefully. So that's all for today. See. How do I get out of here? Hmm. Okay. Something here. Hmm. So thank you so very much. It's interesting.